What if I told you that the same stage that launched one of Christian music's brightest stars also became the place where his entire world came crashing down in just 72 hours? And what if that same prestigious platform later welcomed a man who had never sung professionally in his life? Someone who spent more time in weight rooms than recording studios. These aren't hypothetical questions. They're the real stories of Michael English and Todd Suttles. Two men whose journeys through the Gaither vocal band can't be more different. Yet both walked away from one of gospel music's most coveted positions. By the time we're done here, you'll understand why talent alone isn't enough to survive in Christian music, and why sometimes the most authentic voices are the ones that get pushed out. Michael English wasn't just another gospel singer trying to make it big. Born in 1962 Kenansville, North Carolina, he grew up breathing Southern gospel music. His family group, the Singing Samaritans, traveled the church circuit. And from an early age, Michael's voice stood out in ways that made professionals stop and listen. This wasn't just talent. It was a kind of gift that comes along maybe once in a generation. By his teens, groups like the Singing Americans and the Goodmans were already fighting over him. Then in 1985, Bill Gaither made the call that would change everything. Michael joined the Gaither vocal band, and suddenly Southern gospel had a new sound. His tenor could make you cry without warning. And songs like, "Mary, did you know?" and "I Bowed on My Knees and Cried Holy" became instant classics because of how Michael delivered them. He didn't just sing words. He made you feel every syllable in your chest. For fans, Michael English became the voice of an era. He was the complete package. The looks, the voice, the spiritual depth that made every performance feel like a genuine encounter with something bigger than entertainment. By the early 90s, Michael was ready for his solo career. Bill Gaither supported the move, and Michael's debut album proved everyone right about his potential. He wasn't just good for gospel music. He was good enough to cross over into mainstream contemporary Christian music. Then came 1994, the year that should have cemented Michael's legacy as one of the greats. At the Dove Awards, he walked away with 4 trophies, including Artist of the Year. That night, standing on stage with those awards in his hands, Michael English represented everything Christian music aspired to be. Radio couldn't play his songs enough. Churches wanted him for their special events. Young singers studied his technique. The industry was already predicting he'd be the next Amy Grant, someone who could bring gospel music to audiences that had never set foot in a Southern church. But here's the thing about reaching the top. The fall from that height is absolutely devastating. Just days after his Dove Award triumph, Michael made a confession that sent shockwaves through the entire Christian music world. He'd had an extramarital affair with Martha Jordan, a singer from the group First Call. The timing couldn't have been worse. This wasn't some old mistake finally coming to light. This was happening right now, at the peak of his career. While he was being celebrated as the face of Christian music excellence, the response was swift and brutal. His record label dropped him immediately. Radio stations pulled every song. Churches canceled appearances and released statements distancing themselves from him. Some of his fellow artists publicly condemned him. Michael's reaction tells you everything about where his head was in that moment. He voluntarily returned all 4 Dove Awards, including Artist of the Year. Instead, he gave them back because the shame was too crushing to hold on to anything that reminded him of what he just destroyed. The fallout went beyond his career. His marriage ended. Depression hit him like a freight train. He turned to substances to numb the pain of watching everything he'd built disappear overnight. For years, Michael English essentially vanished from public life. And here's where the story gets really interesting, because it exposes something uncomfortable about how Christian communities handle fallen leaders. Think about the songs Michael had been singing his entire career. Amazing Grace, The Prodigal Son, stories about broken people finding redemption, messages about God's mercy for those who mess up. Yet, When Michael became the living embodiment of those themes, when needed that grace more than he'd ever needed anything, large parts of the Christian music world responded not with compassion, but with total rejection. Radio stations didn't say, "Here's someone who can teach us about redemption." They treated his music like it was contaminated. Churches didn't offer talk alongside him through restoration. They worried about what his presence would do to their reputation. This contradiction, singing about grace while practicing condemnation, reveals a toxic pattern in religious celebrity culture that goes way beyond Michael's individual story. But Michael's story doesn't end in that dark place. Bill Gaither, who could have easily walked away and protected his own reputation, quietly stayed in contact. He offered support without making it public. He reminded Michael that his failure had erased his worth as a person or his gifts as a singer. This wasn't about excusing what happened. It was about doing the hard, unglamorous work of factual restoration. Slowly, with help from counselors, friends, and Bill's steady presence, Michael started rebuilding. He got sober. He confronted the issues that had led to his choices. He took real responsibility instead of making excuses. And gradually, he started singing again. When Michael rejoined the Gaither vocal band in 2009, it meant something profound. For some people, it was proof that grace isn't just a concept you sing about. It's something that actually happens in real life. For others, it raised questions about whether enough time had passed, whether true repentance had occurred. But anyone who heard Michael sing during this second chapter noticed something different. The technical ability was still there, maybe even better than before. But now there was a depth that couldn't have existed without the fall. When he sang about grace, you knew he wasn't performing. He was testifying to something he'd lived through in the darkest possible way. In 2013, Michael left the Gaither vocal band again, and this time the reasons were more complicated. The official statement talked about his solo career, scheduling issues, health concerns, all true, but insiders suggested there was more to it. The emotional weight of performing while carrying his past remained crushing. Chronic anxiety made every show feel like being judged all over again. The practical challenges of balancing solo work with the band's touring schedule created constant stress. Some people wondered if there were tensions about his role in the group, questions about whether he'd ever fully escaped the shadow of his scandal. This second exit was about moral failure. It was about exhaustion. Sometimes the weight of redemption in public feels almost as heavy as the weight of public shame. Now, let's talk about someone whose path to the Gaither vocal band was so different it almost sounds made up. Todd Suttles didn't come from gospel music royalty. He wasn't discovered as a teenage prodigy. He didn't spend decades climbing the Southern gospel ladder. Todd came from college athletics. He was a strength and conditioning coach at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, respected for his ability to build toughness in athletes and lead teams through intense preparation. Some insiders hint at philosophical disagreements that went deeper than scheduling conflicts, touching on sensitive issues like race and Christian music, compensation disparities between members, and different visions for what gospel music should prioritize in today's cultural landscape. Most tellingly, Todd's public appearances with the group have become sparse, and his social media, which he'd previously used enthusiastically to promote Gaither events, has gone almost silent about the band. This conspicuous absence has fueled speculation. Some think he's quietly pursuing new ministry opportunities that better fit his gifts. Others believe he's reassessing priorities and recognizing the demands that align with his values around family and balance. Still others, particularly those with inside connections, suggest more significant conflicts that have never been made public. There's also been talk about potential tensions between Michael and Todd themselves. Though we're venturing into speculation territory here, people close to the band have suggested their personalities and approaches might not have meshed smoothly. Michael was the consummate professional with decades of experience. Someone who understood technical demands and brought intense emotional energy that required excellence from everyone. His background was steeped in Southern gospel traditions, where vocal precision and professional presentation were non-negotiable. Todd came from a completely different world, where authenticity mattered more than technical perfection, where the energy of the moment could override careful planning, where a team-first coaching mentality shaped how he approached partnerships. According to some accounts, these different approaches occasionally created friction during rehearsals and tours, particularly around artistic authority and stage dynamics. Others downplay any serious conflict, suggesting what looked like tension was just natural adjustment when very different personalities work toward the same goal through different methods. What's certain is that both men represent crucial aspects of what gospel music needs to be. The Gaither Vocal Band, like any long-standing organization, constantly navigates between maintaining traditions that made them successful and adapting to changing expectations and new voices. Michael represented the traditional approach at its absolute best. A voice so exceptional, it justified the entire Southern gospel enterprise. Todd represented something newer and harder to define. A reminder that God's calling doesn't follow professional pathways, that authenticity can rival technical excellence in moving hearts, and that gospel music needs voices from outside its traditional circles to stay relevant. Any friction between these approaches wasn't really about personality conflicts, but about larger institutional questions every artistic organization faces. Looking at these intertwined stories reveals profound lessons that extend beyond these two men, even beyond gospel music. Michael's fall and the industry's response show how Christian communities create impossible standards for public figures, celebrating their gifts while demanding moral perfection no human can sustain. The tragedy isn't that Michael failed because everyone fails, but that the Christian celebrity infrastructure created an environment where his failure triggered immediate total rejection rather than being absorbed within a framework of grace. The people singing about redemption proved remarkably reluctant to extend it, exposing deep sickness in how religious communities handle the humanity of their leaders. Michael's story is ultimately hopeful because restoration did happen. But we shouldn't forget the unnecessary years of suffering caused by a system that preached grace but practiced condemnation. Todd's story teaches us about what gets valued and marginalized in professional ministry. He brought extraordinary gifts that couldn't be measured in technical ability or credentials, and his presence expanded the group's reach significantly. Yet, rumors of his struggle suggest institutions built on traditional models didn't always know how to honor voices from outside those models, even when those voices bring genuine value. If Todd experienced marginalization or conflict, it wasn't from lack of talent, but because systems designed around one approach struggled to accommodate different backgrounds and perspectives. This speaks to a larger challenge facing Christian institutions: creating space for diverse voices without losing identity or mission. Third, and perhaps most importantly, these stories remind us that the people who create the music we love, the voices that lead us in worship and inspire us in our faith journeys, are fundamentally human, carrying their own wounds, fighting their own battles, and navigating their own complicated relationships with calling and career. Michael English's soaring tenor and emotional depth came not just from natural talent, but from a life that included profound pain, devastating failure, and hard-won redemption. His ability to sing about grace with such conviction isn't despite his fall, but in many ways because of it, because he knows from personal experience what it means to be graciously lifted from a pit of despair. Todd Suttles' infectious joy and authentic presence on stage weren't manufactured for performance. They emerged from a life lived outside the gospel music bubble, from experiences in weight rooms and coaching meetings where he learned that genuine connection matters more than polished presentation. Both men brought their whole selves to their ministry with all the complications that entails. And while that created challenges and conflicts, it also created moments of genuine spiritual power that touched countless lives. As the Gaither Vocal Band continues its journey into the future, it will undoubtedly welcome new members with new styles and new perspectives because that's what any living institution must do to survive across generations. But in that forward movement,